Today we're looking at the study guide for Web 2. Now the first thing we looked at, this is our first test in Web 2, and we have to try to remember what our form controls look like. Here's the form tag. A lot of people I see sometimes they put the form tag in there multiple times. You really need it only there once per page. But you want to make sure it wraps around any of the controls that you are using in your web page. Looking here, the controls I'm going to be testing you on. First is the text box, and that's the syntax for doing that. We've decided a little bit that we're going to forego making XML compliant HTML because that seems to have been kind of removed. So you don't need to put in these closing tags. You can leave those out. We also have radio buttons. Typically with the radio buttons and checkboxes, you put the text that goes along with the checkbox or the radio button on the right. So that's not included here. For just a regular button, make sure the type is button. The default in Dreamweaver is the submit button, which has a very specific behavior. What it does is it refreshes your screen, and then it's frustrating because you've lost all your input. When you say type in there, don't say submit, say button. The new thing that we learned in Web 2 is that we can put in events in, like the onClick event. And that's what actually initiates a lot of our JavaScript. Last thing is called a select menu. This has like a million different names, like a select menu or a drop-down menu or a combination box, because it's a combination of a list and a text field. So some people call them combo boxes. But it's when you have a list of things and you select one of those things. Note too that you can specify which one is selected. It's kind of repetitive, but and again with these we can leave off those backslashes or forward slashes. These options still need to be there, but we'll just go with that. One thing about computer science and computers in general is it changes almost constantly. It's hard to create curriculum where it stays current because there's so many changes going by. Slides I made a year ago are now obsolete. It's frustrating. Which means that if you're a software engineer or a computer scientist, you have to constantly read to figure out what the changes are going to be. They're for good reasons, but you really have to stay well informed. So to call a JavaScript function, the ones we've used so far are like onClick on a button, but you can use onClick on a picture or anything like that and can let you do more JavaScript. You can also determine when the mouse is over something or when the mouse moves out. You're not even clicking on it. You're just hovering over it. So this is how you do mouse hovers. And you can execute different JavaScript based on the mouse hovering over something. And if you're really kind of a freak about keeping things correct, you can actually just say Unchanged. So anytime something changes, like say if you have a text box and they type in a funny character or anything, you can process that and say, hey, that's not one of the valid characters. And so you can choose to ignore it. I recognize we haven't talked about this, so this is the new stuff that you'll have to pay attention to for the test. We don't really do this for real until our next assignment, so I'm kind of jumping the gun, but I do want to talk about a couple of these things. Now, we've used the alert box before, right? You just want to put a message up on the screen. This is how you do it. You say window.alert. So there's this object called window. You know, we talk about the document file, right? Just called document, right? That's the current web page. Well, the window that's the document resides in, that's another object that you can interact with. So there's a few other window functions that you can take advantage of. If you want to open up another page in a new browser tab, you can say window.open. The first parameter is put in the URL of the place you're wanting to go to, and then the second would be maybe a little title that's on the top of the window. Or I guess that's the title that's on the tab up at the top of the web page if you have a tab browser, and most of them are that way now. So that opens up a new page, window.open. Now a lot of people confuse that with window.location. Say you want to completely replace the current tab with another web page. This is what you would do to do that. They press a button, now you want to bring up another page. You can say window.location, and now that tab takes you automatically to this new page. Yeah, it's like a hyperlink, but it's a replacement hyperlink. Some hyperlinks, when you click on them, replaces what's on the screen. That's typically the default behavior, but sometimes you don't want it to open a new page. You want to keep that page and open up another one. It's kind of odd to do it this way. There's a better way to do this, and I'm going to talk about that in upcoming lectures. But say you wanted to just replace everything on the current page with more information, and we did that in our survey assignment, right? We just replaced all the data. Is this a very practical way of doing it? Not really. There's a better way. Something called inner HTML. Have you heard of that? No. So we're going to talk about that. They didn't have that before, and now they do. So I took a look at the test, and I want to make sure that the study guide matched up with the test. Okay, so you're declaring a local variable. So use the var keyword. Now what a local variable is it only lives within that function. As soon as you finish executing that function, the variable kind of just goes away. So it's a better way to do variables. If you don't say var there, it makes a global variable. It's global to the window, I guess. And that's always a bad idea. You want to avoid global variables any way you can. It used to be, in old computer languages, people would use global variables, and then there would be a problem with the variable because something would change something in the global variable and the whole program crashes. Problem is you can't figure out where that is. So if you have a ton of JavaScript and you're using global variables where every variable is accessible to every other function in the JavaScript code, that's a bad thing. And it's really hard to debug. So it's always a good idea, if you're only using the variable inside the function, put the var keyword on the front, and that creates that variable only for that function. Now here's the assignment operator. We did go over this, but you take the thing on the right and assign that value to the thing on the left. So on the left is usually a variable, or sometimes it's a text box value or something like that. So this isn't saying x equals 5, it's actually saying set x equal to 5. Okay? So it's an active thing. It's not like in algebra where it's not active. It's just telling you it's equal to 5. Here you're saying whatever it was, now it's equal to 5. I'm changing it. You can't go the other way. 5 equals x. You take the value of x and assign it to 5. Well, 5 is not a variable. Can't store it that way. So in algebra that would be okay, but in programming land that doesn't work. Here we have order of operations. There's actually 17 levels. I actually looked it up. That's a little overkill. I didn't want to go over all that. But here's the ones people use most often, right? The parentheses come first, multiplication and division come next, and addition and subtraction come last. So here, a lot of people read equations right to left. They'll say 5 plus 3 is 8 times 2 is 16, but what you get is 30. And the reason why you do that is it will do the multiplication first before it does the addition. So 3 times 2 is 6. Or I didn't put a multiplication there. I should say 11. Yeah, so it does 3 times 2 is 6, and then it adds it to 5 after that. So just keep that in mind when you're doing there's like on the test there's about 8 questions about order of operations. You need to know by looking at the equation what answer you're going to get. Now to get input from a text box or send output to that text box, you'll note that the text box values switches sides. So you're moving from the right to the left. So when you're trying to get the value out of the text box that you're going to process, take that out and store that in myvar. And then once you've done all your magic in the processing, you go the other way. You take the variable and now you send it back out to perhaps a text box. Now there's this constant ambiguity in JavaScript, whether you're working with strings or whether you're working with numbers. And it's always kind of a puzzle which one you're working with. If you remember our big, small, average assignment, where you added 3 numbers together, and instead of getting the numbers added together, you had the digits pasted together, and you got the wrong answer. Right? And so that's this dichotomy. Is this a number or is this a string? If any part of the things you're putting together is a string, it's going to change all the other parts to strings as well. So x plus 1 is going to add 1 to x, but if we say x plus 1, it's actually going to give you the string x1 and store that into x. They call this dynamic typing, and it's really terrible. Luckily, there's a way to figure out what type of thing you're currently working with. I'm going to show you how to use this new operator called type of, but we won't do that for the test. Now, when you have a checkbox, it's either checked or it's not checked. Say you have a text box on your HTML that says 2-day shipping. If they check it, then yeah, you charge them for 2-day shipping. If they don't check it, it's just ground. Now, a checkbox only has 2 states. So once you ask if it's checked, you don't have to say, okay, if it's unchecked? Well, you already know that, because if it's not checked, it's got to be unchecked. So you don't need to ask the question. You can just say else. I see that a lot. A lot of people asking questions of the computer that they already know the answer to. Radio buttons. Say you have radio buttons. This time there are 2 separate radio buttons. You'll note that when you work with radio buttons, you have to set all the buttons that are supposed to be together are mutually exclusive. They should all have the same name. And then you can treat it kind of like an array. So if you want to get the first radio button, it's a 0. The second one, in the brackets, you say 1. And then finally, since, say there's 3 different ways to ship, you already know that the last one has to be ground. So if the first 2 aren't checked, you know the last one is. So you can just set it. You don't have to check it. But that's how you go to a group of radio buttons and figure out which one's checked. We talked about if statements, but these are called chained else if. So if, and then else if, and then else is the last one. That's called a chain else if, and you can make this go on forever. Relational operators. These are used when you're comparing one thing with something else, and we've seen these in other languages, but less than, greater than. They have these compound ones, like less than or equal to. Since we don't have that on our keyboard, we have to kind of manufacture it. So we put 2 of those together, and that's pretty consistent in most languages. The equality operator, equal to, is 2 equal signs. And then there's another one, not equal to. Not in a lot of C-derived languages is an exclamation point. Now there's a third one, or there's a final one that's not on this list. I do want to mention is 3 equal signs. As a joke, I call this really equal. But in actuality, if both the type and the value. So if both the type so if you say equal and you have a string has the number 1 in it, and you have a number that has the number 1 in it, if you do equality, it's going to say that's true even though they're 2 different data types. Right? So if you really want to make sure that they're both exactly the same and they're interpreted exactly the same way, both of them have to be numbers or both of them have to be strings, then you use the triple equals. So that's kind of new, but that won't be on the test. I just wanted to make sure I complete that. But again, I call this really equal. It's really, really equal.
Can I get an example of the triple equal?
Yeah, let's look at that then. Now, if you put in a script tag, you used to have to do this. You'd have to say type equals JavaScript or something. But the default for scripting inside web pages is JavaScript now. It didn't used to be. They had something called VB script and some other scripting languages. But now JavaScript is pretty much ubiquitous. So they don't even mention the type of the script. The assumption is now everything's JavaScript. If you don't specify, so we're looking at the script and we want to compare 2 numbers. So if we say, I guess we have to make a function first. Okay, so we have this variable called x, and we set that equal to the string 1. And we have variable y, and we set that equal to 1. No, that's the point I'm trying to make, is these are two different data types. So if x equals y, and you say window.alert. Maybe something like that. Yeah, 2 for now, and we'll see what it comes up with, okay? Yeah, I'll show you that in a second. So let me put a on load here. So when the page is first loaded, you can actually call JavaScript at that point. So we'll call it test. They are equal. So even though one's a string and the other one's a number, it takes the string and converts it to a number, or maybe it takes the number and converts it to a string, then compares them and tells you they're equal. But say you want to make sure that the data types are equal as well. That's when you use the third equal sign. So if you put another equal here, and then I reload it, we get they are not equal, okay? So that's the difference. Is triple equals means that both the data type and the value or the content of the variable both have the same thing. Let's go back to our slides then. So that's a good example of triple equals. So we just saw an if statement, right? I created an if statement to do our little test. But the formal syntax for it is you say if, and then in parentheses you put the condition. And then you do some stuff if the condition is true. Otherwise, you do some stuff when the condition is false. Here's my closing. So here's the correct syntax for that. Now sometimes you have an if statement where if it's true you want to do something, but if it's false you don't want to do anything. So you can leave out the else clause. You can also smash it into one line. The reason I show you that is because there's one on the test that does it this way, so I wanted you to see an example of it. The browser doesn't care where the spaces are. Humans do, but not browsers, so this will work just fine. Now when you're working with conditional expressions and if statements, you sometimes need to use logical operators. So here's the logical operators. There's the AND operator, this and that, logical OR, and then there's logical NOT. Well, this is how an AND operator works. So you have a condition, probably has a relational operator. That evaluates the true and false. And then you have another condition. So you have two conditions that you're testing. And you only want to go inside when both conditions are true. You use logical AND. AND says, if this is true and that is true, then do this stuff. Okay? So AND, both of them have to be true for the combined condition to be true. Otherwise, the combined condition is false. So if both conditions are true, you do the true part. If one or both of the conditions are false, then you do the else part. Here's logical OR. If condition 1's true or condition 2 is true, then do some stuff. So it has a little bit different take on it. But the way I remember it is both condition 1 and condition 2 must be false for the combined condition to be false. Otherwise, the combined condition is true. So it's just like the inverse of an AND, kind of. Okay? You're just kind of stating it a little bit different. So if you were going to use English statements, Mr. V was born in Mexico, or Mr. V is 35 years old. Well, I was born in Mexico, but I'm certainly not 35 years old. I won't tell you how old I am. I'm 35 in base 16, I think. So if I change the base. Oh, well, how old am I in base 16? I'm 52. Ooh. Well, base 16 makes it sound better until you get to letters. Like I was 2A for a while, and that doesn't really work. But yeah, if you state your name in base 16, then you sound a little bit younger. Okay, so both conditions have to be false for the output to be false. Otherwise, it's true. So yeah, I certainly not that young of an age, but I was born in Mexico, so that was kind of interesting. Logical NOT, there's only one condition. And this is kind of, it seems like it's easy, but it's not. So if condition 1 is false, you say not false, and that makes it true, so you do the true part. If condition 1 is true, and you say not true, that makes it false. So the way I try to remember this is, if you say not condition, you do this if the condition is false. That's the first part. If that condition 1, before you apply the little not to it, happens to be true, then you do the bottom part. So it just flips the condition. And again, it's not a binary operator, it's a unary operator. What does binary operator mean? You guys know? 2, yeah. Is it in base 2? Not really. What they're talking about is the number of operands, okay? I was at a talk at some conference, and not is a unary operator. Unary meaning one, it only takes one operand, but he called it urinary operator. But I went, oh, he's not going to live that one down. That was funny. So we all laughed. He laughed too, so that's good. What if you have 3 operands? What's that called? Yeah, it's kind of weird. It's tertiary, or ternary. That's it, ternary. There is a ternary operator in JavaScript, I think. Although, don't quote me. Now, here's some conditional examples. On the test, I'm going to give you a set of conditional expressions, and you're going to just need to tell me if it's true or false. So I'll give you some values. Assume x equals 5 and y equals 7. You'll see something like that. So is x less than 3? Well, 5 is not less than 3, so that's false. And y is equal to 7. Notice I have 2 equal signs here. That's the equality operator. So I have false and true. Remember, to get true from an AND operator, both conditions have to be true. So since 5 is not less than 3, x is not less than 3, then this conditional expression evaluates to false. Here's another conditional expression. Is x greater than 1 or y not equal to 7? Well, let's take a look at both conditions. Is x greater than 1? Yeah, it is. Or, now do we even have to ask the second question? Because once one of them is true, it's true. You don't have to ask anymore. So a lot of computer languages say, well, the first one's already true, so I'm just going to bail right here. And I'll never do the next part. Speeds things up a little bit. The second one is false, right? Because 7 is not equal to 7. Well, it is equal to 7, so that's false. So if you have true or false, that gives you true. Okay? So you'll get a series of these that you'll have to work through. We also did a little bit of this, but say when they click on a picture, you want to change the picture to something else. I think we did this in our quiz program. You can say document.pick1 perhaps is the name of the picture, and then you can change the picture source, and that redoes the picture. You can change the picture's height. You can double the size of the picture. All these can happen dynamically in your JavaScript program. And then here's some functions that we may or may not have used. Let me just correct the slide. So you have a string that's a floating point number. Floating point numbers are numbers that have a decimal point and things to the right. Say you want to turn that string into a number, that you can call the parse float function on that, and that will turn it into a floating point number. There's is not a number. That was NaN, that's what it means, not a number. You ask the user to type in their age. So say I type in 2A as my age. Well, it will check to see, it'll look at 2A, is that a number? Well, in base 16 that's a number, but not in base 10. So if you pass that to is not a number, it'll say true, yeah, it's not a number. So make them type in an actual number. Now if you have a string you want to embed a line break to, you can put a \n there. You see this a lot in window alert boxes. Say you want to kind of put paragraphs in the window alert box. You can embed a \n into the screen. You won't see \n. What you'll see is a carriage return or a line feed. So again, I made this match up with the test pretty accurately. So if you know that stuff, you should do pretty well on the test.